Hello everyone, I found a Federal 990 sewing machine inside of a cabinet at a local restore, and I wanted to bring that sewing machine home so that I could review it for you all and also be able to produce a manual so that others would have a way to learn how to use this machine if they ever found one like it out in the wild. The manual, as well as additional information about the history of the sewing machine, can be found over on my blog, and I have linked that down below in the description. Whenever you shop for a second-hand sewing machine, you have to keep this in mind. The overwhelming majority of people do not sew. So, when a sewing cabinet comes into a thrift store, it is a burden to the shop owner. They are just looking to get rid of the machine, and most of them have no idea that the sewing machine can be taken apart from the cabinet. They usually just think that the machine has to go along with the cabinet. So, what I typically do is ask the manager if I can take the sewing machine without the cabinet so that they can sell the cabinet separate as a end table or nightstand to another customer. Sometimes the managers are excited about this, and other times they pass. Either way, this is something to be aware of in case you are able to find a vintage sewing machine out in the wild. I was able to get the Federal 990 for free because she wanted to keep the cabinet. So it worked out well for both of us. Everyone's process is a little bit different, but what I typically do is clean the exterior of the machine first and then open up the machine and use a small paintbrush to rub kerosene on the internal parts. This gets off all of the grease and built up gunk that may be inside of the machine without actually exposing the internal parts to water, which may cause some corrosion. That's my method, but I know that everybody isn't the same. The wiring is very brittle. You can't see it on the camera. I've tried to record it multiple times to try to get you to see it, but I don't think this is going to be something that you're going to be able to visually see. And then also, these plugs are rounded, and the new light motor block sewing machine foot pedals are squared and not round. So this will need to be changed in order to fit the new foot control, and I do have the original foot control for this machine, but the wiring is completely split, and I'm questioning whether or not I should rewire it or just replace it with a brand new electronic foot control, but we'll see. I don't plan on keeping this machine, so I am going to replace the wiring so that whoever ends up with this machine will have one that is really safe to operate. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. I have this multimeter here that you've probably seen in other videos. I only paid about $6 for it, and it takes one of those square batteries, and I think that either the battery is dead or something is wrong with the multimeter, because whenever I try to do a reading, I already know that it's just not accurate. So what I did is I went to the store and picked up this Cobalt multimeter set. And I did this because this one, I don't need the receptacle tester or the this right here. I don't need either one of these things, but I bought them anyway because this whole set was only $22. Now on Amazon, I checked, and it is about $34. I will leave a link down in the description, but I do think that I got a really good deal from Lowe's this time with this one, because I know that normally the things cost less on Amazon than what they are in the store, but this time it was the reverse. So I don't know if you can see that the cord's not long enough to reach, but she is indeed working, and I have not tripped the breaker, and I have not caused a short anywhere. So I think that we are thumbs up on this. Why, oh why did I just say that? Because I installed the working light inside of the sewing machine, and then a few days later the light stopped working. I took the light back out of the machine and took it apart a lot farther than I had before. What I discovered is that the little copper piece in there that makes contact with the positive lead was bent, so it was no longer making proper contact. And for any of you who do sewing machine restorations, you'll know that when that little copper piece gets messed up, it is very dangerous to continue using the same switch in that way, because if you turn the switch the incorrect way and it makes contact with both positive and negative, then you could cause a fire. So I sent the light off to CeeLo Education TV, and he put an entirely new switch inside of the light and gave it back to me. But the problem with the switch that he gave me was that it wouldn't fit inside of the machine because there wasn't enough room for the wiring to fit. So I ended up having to undo some of the fanciness of what he had done and leave the light as just one that automatically powers on when you plug it into the machine. If you recall, there was a paddle on the front of this machine, and that paddle was used to switch from straight to zigzag, and this goes from 0 to 4. And on these vintage machines, they have it to where you can make patterns on the machine by switching it manually like this and being able to quickly switch it back to change the pattern, because that was a cool thing back in the 50s. But the problem with that is that this particular button gets under a lot of stress when you do that, and that paddle, I could actually feel it wiggle. In spite of me being extra careful with the paddle, it broke off. So I ended up having to replace this paddle with a long screw. The only store that had a screw that was even remotely like what I needed was Ace Hardware. So Ace is definitely the place for some of these specialty screws, and I ended up going with the M4-7 screw, and that 7 just represents the length of the screw because I needed that screw to be extra long so that I could shift back and forth between straight stitch and zigzag. Problem solved, right? Well, not so much. And I'm going to explain why. So this knob right here on the machine can turn to change out your stitch selection, and there's 7 different stitches on this machine. This knob right here is attached to a gear, and that gear makes contact with another gear, which is this one. And then in turn, when this gear turns, it causes this thing to move up in a certain way, and it makes contact with this cam stack here to change the different stitch on the machine. So that's a lot of processes there just to change to a different stitch, but that's the way that it works. So this gear right here was seized, and it would not allow for me to turn this knob in order to be able to switch to a different stitch. So I had to remove this entire piece from the machine and try to figure out why it wouldn't turn. And there was a collar on here, and that collar had a screw, and I assumed that that screw would be the reason why this gear would not turn. But after much searching and then taking it back to CeeLo Education TV, he showed me that it wasn't because of the collar. And we worked and we worked and we worked to try to get that collar off, and it just would not come off. So he finally ended up having to break that collar off. And what we found is that the reason why this will not turn is because this is bent. I don't know if you can see that. You can barely see it is bent, and that's why it won't turn. So in order for this to be fixed, he would have to take this off and heat it to bend it back into place, and then he would have to replace this collar here. He said that it's fairly simple to replace a collar, but it would take hours of his time in order for that to happen. And I don't think that this is worth it at this point in time, because the machine is doing straight and zigzag. And this cam stack right here is not a metal cam stack. This is a Bakelite cam stack, and eventually this is going to crack anyway. So I don't find it necessary to go to all the trouble of bending this back into place and putting a new collar on, because it's just not worth it. It's just not. On every sewing machine restoration, I open up the motor and check its condition. I also do a test with the multimeter to make sure that it is electrically sound before I plug it into any outlets. I noticed that this motor wasn't in the best condition, but I still decided to add the one single drop of oil to the oil wick, and I also put 2 new motor brushes inside. Now I'm just going to put the motor back together and button up the whole machine so that we can see how well this project turned out. So the quality of the stitch on this machine is beautiful. It's perfectly even on both sides, and that's exactly what we want when we're looking at a vintage machine. The only thing that I would say is that I'm not satisfied with the quality of this vintage model, because the cam stack is broken. And then 2, I have tested out this machine for over an hour of sewing, and I feel that the motor is slightly warm and it has slowed down, and it's just sewing a lot slower now that the motor has gotten warm. So I kind of feel like the motor is on its last legs, and that the motor just needs to be replaced with an aftermarket one. I know that that's not ideal to replace vintage motors, because vintage motors are a lot better quality built than the new ones that are out today. However, when you get a motor that is as worn out as this one, it's better to just go on and replace it. Yes, I did put a drop of oil on the oil wick in the motor, and I also put brand new motor brushes in here, and it just still is doing what it does. And some of you might say, well, what about the foot control? I have a brand new foot control on this machine. This is a foot control that I just keep in stock in my space, so that if I ever have a light motor block sewing machine that needs repairing, that I can hook it up and test the machine out. Anywho, the foot control has nothing to do with how this machine is riding. At first, when I first started using this machine at the beginning of the hour, it worked perfectly fine, but as time went on, it started to slow down as that motor got warm. So these are some of the things that you may run into if you ever do find a vintage sewing machine out in the wild. And I hope that this video was helpful to someone. I'm not sure who it might be helpful to, but I hope that it'll be helpful to you all. And I'll catch you on the next one. Peace. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to receive more sewing related content.